I think it's fair to say former police officer Rogerson is an evil man. But there's much more to the Rogerson story. Publicly, he was a highly decorated star of the New South Wales Police Force, a man many viewed as a potential police commissioner. But that was all a lie. In reality, he was a bad cop, as crooked as can be.
The saga of armed robber by the name of Phillip Western, who was a Kiwi. He robbed a bank in New Zealand. He did some time there. He comes over to Australia. And Western robs a bank at the end of 1975. Armed hold-up squad is onto him and his three accomplices within 24 hours. He's arrested in Bondi Junction, I think on January 1, 1976, at gunpoint by police. He goes for a gun. It's a violent struggle. He applies for bail. It's initially refused. He applies for bail again, and armed hold-up detectives oppose it vigorously. Should not get out. Bail's refused, bail refused, bail refused. I think in total there's about 8 applications. He just keeps going and going and going. Roger gets involved, and all of a sudden the tone of what the armed hold-up squad is saying about Phillip Western changes quite dramatically. Western gets bail. About a week he reports, but then he stops reporting to Paddington Police Station. He's on the run. Very shortly after that, he's at Westfield Parramatta, Phillip Western, the armed robber. A bank officer notices him near the front door of the bank, trying to get in. He confronts Western. There's a bit of a struggle. Western runs away. The bank manager chases him. In those days, would you believe bank managers were given revolvers to stop armed robbers? I mean, the bank manager bravely chases Western. Western turns around and shoots him dead. There's an inquiry, but look, and Roger's questioned, but it doesn't go anywhere because it's the inquiry you're having when you're not having an inquiry. There's no doubt now that I've looked at the transcript of that inquiry and spoken to people who are involved, there's no doubt in my mind that all that circumstantial evidence points to Roger Rogerson manipulating the system so that Phillip Western got bail. And there was a huge amount of money, $50,000, either paid or to be paid to Rogerson. And the result of that man getting bail, an innocent bank manager was murdered.
Yeah.
In broad daylight, in the middle of a Westfield shopping. He had 2 kids. Western's on the run. Roger pretty much takes control of the hunt for Phillip Western, key planner in the whole thing. Western is finally located north of Sydney, Avoca, about 80, 90 k's north of Sydney, I think, in a little shack on a beach. The armed hold-up squad and was it the special, it wasn't special weapons in those days, but it was the equivalent. They're all armed with bulletproof vests and shotguns. They surround Phillip Western early one morning. Tear gas goes into the little beach shack where Western is. He's got a gun. Shots are fired from inside. He sticks his head through a bathroom window to be confronted by 3 officers, all with shotguns. They fear they're going to be shot, so they open fire. Phillip Western is shot dead. Lawrence Byrne was shot in 1978, shot by Roger Rogerson. Lawrence Butchy Burn, his nickname was Butchy. He's an armed robber.
Yep.
He's got a record. Roger, in fact, tells me many, many years ago that he'd arrested Butchy a couple of times. He'd done armed robberies. But the armed hold-up squad has a tip-off at least 2 or 3 weeks before that. Butchy is going to rob the takings of South Sydney Juniors on a Sunday, because every Sunday the club takings from the previous Friday, Saturday and so on are taken in an old combi with maybe 1 or 2 old blokes as security and deposited in a night safe in a bank in Anzac Parade. And they observe Butchy Burn 1 week. He's clearly surveilling the old combi as it comes towards the bank, but that's all he's doing. And they know it's Butchy because Butchy is actually in jail at this time, but he's doing day release. So on the Saturday before Butchy is shot, he's in jail. Somebody phones the jail and says, we need Butchy for an urgent painting job, because he had been working on day release for a painting and decorating company. And the jail goes, oh, okay. So Butchy walks out the door that Sunday morning, meets up with two mates, and they go to rob the takings of South Sydney Juniors. You know, the old combi turns up. Butchy's there with his two co-accused, but so is the armed hold-up squad. And Roger has got a bulletproof vest. He's got his shotgun, a Remington shotgun, which apparently has some very powerful shot, not just your normal pellets. There are many, many police there in cars. Roger says, I saw Butchy Burns starting to point his shotgun in my direction. I opened fire. Roger fires 4 blasts from his shotgun. His colleague, the late Arnie Tees, fires at least 4 shots from his service revolver. Some of them go through the windscreens. Some of them go into the tyres. Car takes off down Anzac Parade. This is 10:30 on a Sunday morning, middle of February. Car takes off. Other police who are there in the stakeout start opening fire. One officer empties 6 shots from his Smith & Wesson. A police car gives chase. An officer leans out of the car, firing his shotgun at the escaping crims, who are apparently firing back through the back window, which is now shattered. The car's riddled with bullets. It gets about a few hundred metres down Anzac Parade and comes to a stop. Tyres shot out. Butchy has been mortally wounded. The 2 other guys in the car, incredibly, one of them has a sort of a slight wound. But they're still alive. Nobody quite knows how. I think he said this at one of his shows that he did. He said that car was full of more holes than your mother's colander, you know. And Butchy fell out of the car, dead onto the road. Well, not quite as Roger described it in later years, but Butchy did fall out of the car. He died 6 days later in hospital, and at the very, very short inquest that followed, that as far as I can make out barely got reported, Butchy was shot either by Roger's shotgun or the other bloke who was firing the shotgun, but Roger took the credit. June 27, 1981, it's a Saturday afternoon, just before 3 p.m, in Dangar Place, which is just down from Sydney University. It's parallel to Cleveland Street, I think. Just over the road from the Britannia Hotel. Lanfranchi walks in to meet Rogerson, apparently to try and do some deal, because Warren Lanfranchi is a heroin dealer. He thinks he's there to bribe Rogerson. Rogerson says, and has always maintained, that he was there to arrest Lanfranchi. And once again, the place is surrounded by very heavily armed police, at least 18 of them. So there are police officers in cars. There's a couple of cops in the pub who are having a schooner. Lanfranchi is shot dead. What we know for absolute certain, Royal Lanfranchi is shot dead by Roger Rogerson just before 3 o'clock that Saturday afternoon. 1 shot goes through the heart, 1 is in the neck.
Yeah.
He's on his own. Well, he wasn't quite on his own. He had 18 other police around him and 3 others in the lane with him. That first day is probably the only day he gets away with it, because pretty much straight up in the following days there's a suggestion that Lanfranchi had $10,000 on him to bribe Rogerson, that he didn't have a gun, so Rogerson didn't shoot him in self-defence, as he claimed, and it starts to balloon from there, and Warren's girlfriend, Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, goes on 60 Minutes, national TV, makes some of these allegations. Went to see Keith Lanfranchi. The father. And Keith tells me that his son has been shot in cold blood. It's because he's ripped off one of Roger's heroin dealers a few weeks earlier, and that he's also been told that rather than the shots in the laneway that Saturday afternoon being fired in quick succession, as Roger had told the Sunday telly, the shots were 12 to 13 seconds apart.
1981. When Roger Rogerson shot dead drug dealer Warren Lanfranchi in Dangar Place, Chippendale, an inner Sydney suburb. Rogerson claimed it was self-defence.
Warren Lanfranchi walked directly towards me, and then when he got to about here, he kept walking into the lane, into Beaumont Street, heading towards Dangar Place. And I could see a car coming down the hill, which I knew contained Detective Sergeant Harding and Detective Rod Moore. Well, because at that point of time, he was very, very toey, absolutely jumping. So with that, he said words to the effect that it was an ambush, and I basically agreed with him. And because at that point of time, he then suddenly just backed around and pulled this gun out from these very tight trousers. And as he was bringing it up, I realised this bloke's going to shoot me. So I reached behind for my gun, and because I didn't mess around, and I brought it up and I fired one shot. And then fairly quickly after that, I fired a second shot. And of course, it killed him.
But a week after the shooting, Lanfranchi's girlfriend, Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, went public on 60 Minutes and told Ray Martin a very different story.
Did Warren try to take his gun that Saturday morning or Saturday lunchtime?
Oh, God, no.
Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, a self-confessed heroin addict and prostitute, claimed it wasn't a gun in Lanfranchi's pocket, but $10,000 of drug money to pay off Rogerson.
How do you know, Sally, that he didn't have a gun in the car, that he didn't pick it up on the path as he walked out, that he didn't have it planted somewhere?
Because he left the gun at home and I had the gun. It was a 9mm Smith & Wesson automatic pistol.
And you had it after he left? No question?
Right. No question.
He was definitely armed.
With a 38?
Well, it wasn't a 38, I think it was a 32. I'm not quite sure.
It was 38
a Harrington and Richardson, anyhow. It was a Harrington and Richardson revolver.
And no money was ever found?
No, that's correct.
The go-between for that particular encounter was Neddy Smith.
That's correct.
What was his role in that?
Well, his role was to bring Lanfranchi to the vicinity of Dangar Place.
But Neddy Smith also testified that the frisking he gave Lanfranchi, he didn't have a gun in those skin-tight trousers.
Neddy Smith was a major drug dealer and an informant and drinking buddy of Roger Rogerson.
Do you know if Lanfranchi was carrying a gun?
Well, I patted him down roughly and he didn't have one on him that time.
He did not?
Well, I couldn't find it.
Could you hide a 38 in skin-tight trousers?
Very easily.
But you can't hide a packet of cigarettes in tight trousers. How could you hide a revolver?
Well, I'd say you could.
A coroner found Rogerson shot Lanfranchi whilst trying to arrest him, but the inquest jury declined to say it was in self-defence.
Two women who gave evidence about Rogerson and Neddy Smith both died. Lyn Woodward, who was giving similar evidence to Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, she disappeared while giving evidence and was never seen again. No one ever knows what happened to her, but it's widely believed that Rogerson organised to have her killed.
Mick Drury is speaking for the first time about Rogerson's involvement in the attempt to kill him. And Drury's account of his battle to expose Rogerson's corrupt ways is just the beginning of the real history of the most notorious rat in police ranks. An extraordinary life and death battle between two detectives, undercover drugs cop Mick Drury and a man some had thought could be the next police commissioner, Roger Rogerson.
This escalated to a level that had never been seen before in this country. This was like Chicago in the 1920s or Colombia in the 1990s, where life was cheap.
And policing had lost its way?
Policing hadn't lost its way, but certain individuals, Rogerson in particular, had lost his way. The essence basically is it was just a straight-out assassination of a young police officer at home in front of his family.
It's been 32 years since that night when Mick Drury stood here at the kitchen window of his family home and was gunned down in a crime that has never been solved. But tonight, Mick Drury takes aim, and for the first time claims Roger Rogerson drove hitman Christopher Flannery to his home to shoot him. Christopher Dale Flannery pulled the trigger.
Correct.
But Roger Rogerson drove him to your house.
He actually drove the motor car that night. I have no reservations about that whatsoever. And it makes logical sense. To go in and do a job like that, you needed someone who could protect you so that you wouldn't be stopped by the police. And the perfect driver was Roger Rogerson.
Would have been in 1960 when I was doing weekend vice squad duty.
It is a breathtaking allegation. But the notion that Roger Rogerson could be the biggest rat in the police ranks comes as no surprise to many. This is the kitchen.
Yes, this is the kitchen. A couple of minor changes, but yes, this is the kitchen and the kitchen window, of course. And unfortunately, this is where it all happened.
And the gunman would have been right there.
Just the other side of the window, no more than a metre away.
The detective, a senior constable, had been standing at the kitchen sink of his Chatswood home shortly after 6 o'clock this evening when 2 shots were fired through the window.
It was the crime that rocked the nation. In 1984, a 31-year-old policeman is gunned down in his own home in front of his wife and 2 small children.
I remember the first shot hit me straight through the stomach, into the area just next to the backbone and lodged between the ribs. And the second shot hit me alongside the heart and underneath the shoulder blade. And when it hit the shoulder blade, the percussion of it spun me around and I span back about 3 metres and crashed into the wall.
The shooting of Mick Drury would become a classic Australian television drama, Blue Murder. But this was no Hollywood fiction. This was Sydney's reality in the 1980s. Mick, why did you choose a life in the police force?
As a teenager growing up in Newcastle, it was important for me at the time to go into a vocation that had a future in it. And I really believe the police department as a police officer did. And it's a wonderful vocation where you can help others in need.
But you were pretty young at the time.
19.
And in that short period you developed a passion, it seems, for policing.
Well, I think to this day I still have a passion for being a police officer.
A young Mick Drury was doing the most dangerous police work possible as an undercover cop tracking the Mr. Biggs of the drug trade. And that meant you had to become someone you weren't.
Correct.
How hard is that?
It's difficult at first. It's difficult to be a gangster when you're not a gangster.
But it was work Mick Drury excelled at. In 1981, he won the Peter Mitchell Award, the highest honour for New South Wales Police.
It was a very proud moment for my family and my friends and myself. Very proud moment.
Yet no one could know about it.
Correct.
It wasn't celebrated because you're an undercover cop.
Correct.
The applause had to be held within 4 walls, at the family home.
I remember having a good cup of tea with Mum.
Ironically, a year earlier, the Peter Mitchell Award had been given to none other than Roger Rogerson. Had you heard of Roger Rogerson in your earlier years of policing?
I think every police officer knew of Roger Rogerson.
Indeed, I think at one point he was even considered the kind of police officer who could be the commissioner.
In the minds of some, yes, that would be the case. He was very powerful because of his political connections within the police department. Very powerful. I knew in those days that the police officer-informant relationship, as it was so called, between Roger Rogerson and Eddie Smith, was ethically very, very unhealthy. I knew then.
But Mick Drury is about to learn Rogerson's relationship with a drug dealer is not just unethical, it's deadly. The paths of Mick Drury and Roger Rogerson first crossed in the early 1980s because of this man, Victorian heroin dealer Alan Williams.
Well, as a result of my investigation, Alan Williams was charged in Melbourne with some very serious heroin charges. Very serious indeed.
And this was a significant heroin deal that you had uncovered.
$500,000 worth of heroin or more. My intentions were not to buy, but in actual fact to arrest them, which the Victorian police in due course did.
When drug dealer Alan Williams was to face court, Mick Drury started receiving messages that Roger Rogerson wanted to see him. Turns out it was about the Melbourne heroin matter, a case in which Rogerson had no involvement. Instinctively, Mick Drury knew this was bad news.
If Roger Rogerson wanted to see a young police officer like myself, you didn't ignore that request to go and speak to him.
One way or another, you were going to have to speak to Roger Rogerson.
Correct.
It took a week for Mick Drury to make his way to Darlinghurst Police Station to see Rogerson. And when he did, he made sure Rogerson wasn't expecting him.
And I walked straight in, stood at the other side of the desk. He was sitting down doing his paperwork. And I said to him that he wanted to see me. What was it all about with the Melbourne case? And we started to talk.
And he said?
He said to me that he'd received word from the Melbourne case there was an opportunity there for me to receive $15,000 to $25,000 if I altered my evidence. I took a position on that straight away. And I said to him, I can't discuss it. I will have to go to Melbourne and give my evidence as it is, and nothing can be done. And that's my attitude, and I walked out. I was not going to change my position. Otherwise, my entire career would have been a joke, and I couldn't have lived with that. The whole thing would have been a joke. I would have let down my mother and father, my family, my friends, so many police who had invested great chunks of their career in nurturing me. My entire career would have been a joke if I had have acquiesced to his intentions. It was a tough meeting, but I can assure you I was trained for those tough moments, and I handled it.
Why didn't you report Roger Rogerson?
I could have done that, and I'd thought about that, but I knew that if I reported Rogerson for attempting to bribe me, my career was finished, and perhaps my life was in danger.
The Williams case had already proved deadly to other witnesses. Drury's informant, Frank Avery, died from a heroin overdose.
he was as likely to use heroin as what John Wayne would use heroin. In other words, he didn't use heroin.
And co-conspirator Jack Richardson was shot dead in country Victoria.
He was found dead 50 mile or so out of Melbourne, with 2 bullet holes in the head. And I would suggest to you that was not suicide. And the next person up the tree was myself. Liz, the gun I was shot with was a .357 Magnum, which is very powerful, and did a lot of damage.
You thought you could and would die?
It was an amazing experience. You know, my life went before me. My only regret was, and you can understand this, that both my daughters, they were babies, and they were both crying. And all I wanted to do was go and kiss them. That's all I wanted to do, and just stop them from crying, because Dad wasn't quite sure whether he would ever see his 2 little girls again.
This has convinced his fellow officers he was shot by a hitman after getting too close to a narcotics boss in an investigation. Today, the Sydney Blood Bank was rushed with donors following an appeal for blood for the shot policeman. He received 13 litres in the operation after the attack.
Mick Drury nearly died. He lay in a coma for 10 days.
Police conducted house-to-house interviews in surrounding streets.
A massive police investigation seemed to make little headway.
Police Commissioner Cess Abbott travelled to Sydney's Royal North Shore Hospital.
When he awoke, Drury realised he had to drop a bombshell. How difficult was it to raise Roger Rogerson's name to investigators?
It was tough, but I had to go in that direction. I had to be open and frank with them. And I remember when I mentioned his name, their faces almost became the same colour as the bed sheets. The blood just drained out of their face. They were in a state of shock because they knew what I'd just said. McDonald stood over me. He intimidated me. He threatened me.
In your hospital bed?
I mean, he directed me to get out of bed. I just thought it was quite amazing. I wasn't concerned about it being truthful because it wasn't. But I should have expected this because of the level that I was playing at.
Angus!
Mick Drury stood his ground. And Roger Rogerson would eventually be suspended and charged on allegations of bribery.
I'm saying that I'm not guilty of the charge which is alleged in the summons. Utterly stunned to receiving the summons, and I certainly will be defending it to the utmost. I've got no doubts at all that the charge will be dismissed against me.
A jury did acquit Rogerson. For Mick Drury, it was a massive blow. But then he did something quite extraordinary.
I walked out of court and I confronted him.
But you shook his hand?
Correct.
That's quite something to do.
My oath, and I wanted to because I wanted to engage him. I didn't want him to walk off. I wanted him to look at me square on and be fixed and talk to me so I could get a sense of was there more trouble that was going to happen down the track.
And did you walk away thinking, I'm a little safer than I was before?
I was a little at ease, but I knew there was more to come because only part of the story had been dealt with at that stage, the bribery, not the major issue of the conspiracy to murder.
You don't think the New South Wales Police Force is corrupt?
I do not.
Do you know a corrupt policeman in the New South Wales Force?
I do not.
Have you ever known a corrupt policeman?
No, I've had no dealings with any corrupt police officer.
Do you know who shot Mick Drury?
No.
Not even a good guess?
No, I really don't know who shot Michael Drury. I certainly like to know.
Rogerson may have beaten bribery charges,
reinstated, as in from today.
but whispers surrounding Mick Drury's shooting continued to dog him and the New South Wales Police. In response, the Amiga Task Force was set up in 1987, led by Detective Chief Superintendent Doug Kelly. The investigation into Mick Drury's shooting just hadn't been investigated properly.
No, it hadn't been.
Why was that?
I think a lot of people were looking after Rogerson, and it was to their discredit that they did.
What opinion did you come to form of Mick Drury?
Well, I had a lot of conversations with Mick and took a lot of statements from him, and I formed the impression that he was a very decent young person, a hard-working detective, and someone that we were quite proud to meet and to be part of an investigation into his killers, or his attempted killers.
And what was your opinion of Rogerson?
Not very high.
Doug Kelly's team started from scratch, and investigators were rewarded when drug dealer Alan Williams was caught hiding out in the Northern Territory. Williams admitted to instigating the bribery offer to Mick Drury, and when that failed, bankrolling the assassination attempt.
Finally, Alan Williams put up the money to $100,000 to shoot Mick.
The decision was made that Mick Drury had to be murdered.
Had to be murdered.
And this was decided at a meeting in Sydney?
It was at a meeting in 73 York Street, a restaurant owned by a friend of Rogerson.
Attending the meeting was Alan Williams, his friend and hitman Christopher Dale Flannery, and Detective Sergeant Rogerson.
Alan Williams paid over $50,000 that night. $45,000 was paid to Rogerson, $5,000 was paid to Flannery. The opposite amounts were to be paid on his death.
When you hear this, that must have been a fairly devastating piece of information.
Yes, it was.
A recognition that there is a police officer according to this evidence, there is a police officer prepared to murder another.
It was like a soldier taking money from the enemy to kill another officer, to kill another soldier. It was a terrible situation, and it's probably one of the worst that's been in our history.
It's like a terrorist in the camp.
Absolutely.
The Amiga Task Force had its second breakthrough when Kath Flannery, wife of hitman Christopher Flannery, admitted her husband had met Rogerson at the Arncliffe Scots Club early on the night of the shooting.
She told us that Roger pulled up in a police car at Arncliffe Scots.
On the night of the shooting?
On the night of the shooting. During my interview with Roger, he admitted that happened. But of course he didn't admit that they went to Mick's place.
What did you make of that?
Well, it was highly valuable evidence as far as we were concerned. It was a link in a chain. He was the senior detective running around on the night of the shooting with a hitman, a man that's allegedly killed 12 people.
And the very man that Alan Williams
The very
has
man
told
that
you,
Alan Williams said was part and parcel of the conspiracy to kill Mick.
The very man that Alan Williams said he paid.
That's right.
To assassinate
That's right.
Mick Drury.
That's true.
Oh, no one put to me that Flannery was involved.
But you didn't drink with Christopher Flannery all the time?
No.
So it wasn't an unimportant incident?
No.
Did you know his trade at the time?
Everyone knew it was Mr. Rent-A-Kill.
A cop's been shot. You're having a drink with Mr. Rent-A-Kill, and you didn't marry the two?
Oh, come on. I don't believe Flannery did it.
Why don't you believe Flannery did it?
From his reputation, I don't think he would have missed.
The Amiga Task Force never got to question Christopher Flannery, He disappeared a year after the Drury shooting. His body never found.
You know, Flannery was a long-standing informant.
No, he was not. No.
What are your views on what's happened to him?
Well, I believe that he's dead. Flannery is
Any idea
is
who or
deceased.
why?
I have no idea. I can throw no light.
In February 1988, after a 5-hour interview, Doug Kelly charged Roger Rogerson with conspiracy to murder Mick Drury.
And after that interview was concluded, he was taken to this establishment and charged with conspiracy to murder our former colleague.
It would be the second time Rogerson would face Mick Drury in court.
You must be sick of all this bullshit. Yeah. Every day. Same suit, same shoes, same shirt.
And this time, Mick Drury was confident that the evidence of Alan Williams would be enough to put Rogerson away.
Alan Williams stood in the Supreme Court in New South Wales, and the indictment was read out to him that Alan Williams conspired with Christopher Dale Flannery and Roger Caleb Rogerson to murder Michael Patrick Drury. And when he was asked how he pleaded, he said he wanted to plead guilty. This was an indictment that carried life imprisonment. But as far as I'm concerned, all we wanted was the truth, and we had the truth.
You must have thought you had this wrapped up.
Very strong case. And we were devastated when he was found not guilty. The judge's directions might have been one of the compelling reasons.
The judge had indicated that Alan Williams was obviously
a drug dealer and
a liar.
But he pleaded guilty. We can't get over the fact that he pleaded guilty to the charge and was given 12 years. Oh, Mick was devastated.
While Rogerson thanked the judge and jury as he was discharged, a distraught Mick Drury was helped from the court by members of the Omega Task Force.
Mick only had 3 enemies in the world. He had Alan Williams, the drug dealer that he was part and parcel of arresting in Victoria. Chris Flannery, the renter killer that allegedly killed about 12 people, and Detective Sergeant Roger Rogerson, then a police officer at Darlinghurst, but also a protector of drug dealers.
How difficult was that to see him go free?
I do admit it was very difficult. On the one hand, you had Alan Williams. He pleaded guilty to attempting to bribe me. You have Alan Williams. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to murder me. But the more important principle is that we have a system where a guilty person can be acquitted, but we must never have it where an innocent person is unfairly convicted.
How do you feel about that verdict?
I feel it was a true verdict, and I'm very much elated.
Do you feel justice has been done finally?
I feel so in regard to this, yes.
Do you feel as if you've been...
Absolute relief.
What do you feel about Mr. Drury?
I don't wish to make any comments about subjects such as that.
Mr. Rogerson, what will you now do?
I'm hoping it'll get back to normal again.
If Rogerson felt relieved, it wouldn't be for long. He was found to have $110,000 stashed away under false names in 2 bank accounts. Money he couldn't easily explain.
That doesn't fit the image of an ordinary cop who lives in a fibro house to have $100,000 in a bank account.
Well, out of that $100,000, at the maximum, $16,000 would be the amount that I'd be entitled to.
Who has the rest?
Well, the rest is owned by this friend of mine. And it came from 2 sources. That's right, it came from 2 sources. One from the sale of the motor vehicle, which were payments made to us, and the second was from his winnings.
Was it a consolation prize that Roger Rogerson was finally nailed, at least on having money in bank accounts under false names.
Yes, it was. It was very satisfying, because obviously the money that he had in 2 false names were obviously drug money.
Do you find it unusual that he would have 110,000 plus in 2 bank accounts? One of the names being Dick Tracy, which it was. What a blatant disregard for the truth and honesty in that regard.
Roger Rogerson was jailed for nearly 4 years for perverting the course of justice. Mick, what is this?
Well, you can see in the brickwork there, it's been very well carved in the initials AW for Alan Williams from Melbourne.
Alan Williams was the drug dealer who pleaded guilty to paying Roger Rogerson and Christopher Flannery to kill Mick Drury. It's vandalism that is still clearly evident after 30 years.
I went to Newcastle for 4 or 5 days. First time out of the house, the family. We went to Newcastle to stay with Mum and Dad for a while. And it was that first occasion that we left. They knew.
Who's they?
Rogerson and the group. They knew when I was not at the house. Because when we went to Newcastle, they took the police guard off the house and there was no one at the house.
The initials were carved with chilling intent.
But it was that one little act in their game of terror that when my wife and I looked at that, we realised we had to move. We'd lost the house. That was it.
Oh, so this one act.
One act.
Told you had to go.
This was the icing on the cake. We knew that we could never live in the house again, that it would never be safe.
Devastating. It wasn't just Mick Drury who suffered from the events of that night. It was also an attack on his young family, something that Mick Drury still finds deeply traumatising.
I walked into my wife, who was in the next room in the lounge room, and she was breastfeeding the baby. And I said to her that I thought I'd been shot, and to take the girls into the bedroom and lock the door. I just wanted to make sure they were okay. So, but I can live with that because, you see, my reaction is that if I ever saw a lady and children in trouble, even now, as a former police officer, I'd go through a brick wall to help them, to protect them. It was an honour for me to be a police officer.
Mick Drury's family lost their home, and the overwhelming stress cost he and his wife their marriage. Sallie-Anne Huckstepp.
This is a man who has ruined lives. He is a murderer, and he has abused the trust that was put in him being a serving police officer.
Sasha is the daughter of Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, who in 1981 told 60 Minutes that Roger Rogerson had murdered her boyfriend, Warren Lanfranchi.
When the police become judge, jury and executioner, then somebody has to speak. Somebody has to come forward. Somebody has to start somewhere and stop it.
A few years later, Sallie-Anne Huckstepp's body was found floating in Busby Pond Centennial Park in the heart of Sydney. Sasha Huckstepp has always believed Roger Rogerson wanted her mother dead.
I believe that Rogerson had had enough, that he said that she had to go. He wanted her dead. He was being groomed for bigger and greater things. And, you know, I think that was a big part of his anger and resentment towards my mother. He was being groomed, you know, probably to be police commissioner, the way he was going. And once my mother spoke up, well, that was going to be a little bit difficult.
At the time, Sasha Huckstepp was just 8, but she says she remembers clearly what her mother told her.
Well, it was an ambush. It was a complete ambush.
And you never doubted your mother? You never
No.
doubted she was telling you the truth?
No, there was nothing to gain by lying. She was putting herself at risk.
It was a pretty extraordinary thing to do.
Yeah, very much.
In many respects, she was marking herself.
She was very brave, but I think also very naive. Very, very naive. I think she felt that by talking to you guys, that would keep her safe, that should anything happen to her, everybody would automatically look to Rogerson.
But Mick Drury may not be Rogerson's only victim. Sasha Huckstepp believes he brutalised her life too.
He's a man that shattered my life. He stole my mother from me. He stole my adolescence. I see somebody who thought he had his own green light, as it were, to do whatever he wanted to do and behave however he wanted to behave, and damn be anybody that got in his way.
Sasha was only 12 when an early morning jogger discovered her mother's body floating in a pond in Centennial Park.
Word of the grim find drew a steady stream of detectives to the spot. Those who didn't know her knew of her.
Sallie-Anne Huckstepp's death was blamed on a heroin overdose until the coroner concluded she had been strangled and then drowned.
There's a small bone in the back of your throat called a hyoid bone, and that had been sort of crushed or fractured, or there was something, it'd been displaced.
Which indicated violence?
Which indicates strangulation. There's a specific air choke hold that is done, and because it's far back in the throat, it's not from a blow to the head, or, you know, you have to be grabbed in a specific way to get in and only do damage to that bone without doing damage to the rest of the face or the body. I didn't believe it was an overdose from the beginning.
You surely can't stay here. You surely can't stay in Australia if what you say is correct.
No, I have to leave the country.
She lived, 10 minutes away. She wouldn't be using drugs in a dark park, sitting on the grass in blackness. There's no need.
Who did you suspect would do this to your mum?
My first thought was Rogerson.
Because?
Because I knew that, she had completely shattered his world and his career.
I think it was because she was a very attractive and a good-looking little bird that she got a lot of sympathy from different people, including members of the media and the public. But she really was just a typical common prostitute. And she alleged that I had murdered him, that he had left home with $10,000 in cash down the front of his trousers, and that I had obviously stolen that money when I met him in the lane. And when, of course, I heard what Sallie-Anne Huckstepp was saying on that 60 Minutes program, I was utterly shocked. I was shocked when I learnt that Sallie-Anne Huckstepp had been murdered here in Centennial Park. And of course, from inquiries that were being made and from what we heard, it soon became obvious that she had been murdered by people who she was close to.
What do you believe happened to your mum?
I believe that Rogerson had had enough, that he said that she had to go. He wanted her dead. His go-to man, his green light boy, was Nettie Smith. And Nettie Smith went to one of his go-to guys, Warren Richards. Warren got her to the park. We know that. She was meeting him. Whether Nettie was there, whether he was the one that threw her into the pond, I don't know. But I hold those three responsible.
Nettie Smith was tried and acquitted of Sallie-Anne's murder. As with the shooting of Mick Drury, it is a crime that has never been solved.
You investigated Roger Rogerson pretty hard, didn't you?
Yes.
Not on his Christmas list?
No.
Did he ever threaten to kill you?
Hang on, can we turn this off for a minute?
Did he?
In about 1992, long after the events were over, I received advice that I was on a hit list.
Whose hit list?
Rogers.
And what did you think hearing that?
I had some disbelief in it, because despite Rogers' past, for another cop to be killed would have been the end of any form of tolerance, I think. And Rogerson would have known that.
But the truth of the matter is, if you pissed Roger Rogerson off traditionally, you were in the crosshairs. Is that a fair reading?
You could well be. There was a concern.
1981, Warren Lanfranchi shot dead. 1984, Mick Drury shot at a number of times, nearly died. 1985, Christopher Dale Flannery goes missing, presumed dead. 1986, Sallie-Anne Huckstepp found dead. That's a list of a lot of dead people.
Always good to stay on Roger's best side. When you rack it up like that, there are a lot of dead people, yes. Or almost dead people. A very dangerous man to cross.
One more name. Jamie Gow.
Another man who allegedly upset Roger. So much so that he died.